or what other steps, other things might there be that we'd like to consider? On the ground, basically, in some sense, what's needed.
Could you hear that?
Hey.
Hi.
Hello.
How is everyone? Hi.
We're good. We
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry,
yes, we can.
I keep dropping. My internet is quite unstable, but I'm happy to be here. So my name is Nanta Mosoito. I'm a development practitioner working in the water and climate change sector here in Kenya. And although I missed out, but picking up from where Philip has left, when I was growing up, let me start there. So we'd simply go to the river and then scoop some sand, not to barely 2 feet under the ground, and we have fresh water. But that has changed over time. We scooping sand and getting water is no longer practical. And then one other thing that really worries me, I agree with Philip that there is a need to make more water accessible, but I really don't believe in boreholes. The reason being in Kajiado, let me make a reference to Kajiado County because that's where I have data. We are struggling with over extraction, and that's why our water table has gone significantly low. We are currently looking at 450 feet, and that's not a guarantee that you're going to get water. And so I don't believe that doing more sinking of boreholes will help in any way. In any case, sinking more boreholes, and everyone is extracting water. Everyone is sinking a borehole. No one question would people first to harvest rainwater as much as possible, and then secondly, to increase the vegetation cover. I really believe in natural regeneration. So, because when we were able to easily access water, honestly, it was my home area was in a forest, but currently we don't see any vegetation. So if we encourage the restoration, the natural regeneration of the vegetation that was there back then I believe we will slowly restore our water tables. And then I really believe that at one point we will get back to where we were when I was young, that we can simply scoop some sand and have some fresh water and take it home. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, I think experience from everywhere around the world has proven to be what you said, which is when we drill boreholes, we end up having a greater dependency, greater presumption that the water is not a scarcity, and so we end up drilling deeper. And so California has had a substantial water crisis as a result of that. And the Earth's axis has been found to have tilted this year by a measurable amount, like a meter. The Earth has tilted because of the amount of water we've taken out. So the idea of continue taking out of water from underground, what you risk is flipping the planet over, literally. So boreholes, it may be very attractive, but it doesn't help us to regenerate in that way. However, there are lots of situations where it's quite necessary. Experience in some other areas like Bangladesh and other places is that the people who control the boreholes end up imposing a new layer of corruption into the communities, because everyone now depends on them. And if the borehole's 450 feet, you can't really drill your own. That's really deep.
Yeah.
And so what you do in that case is you are actually allowing, the same as drug lords control, areas where they grow drugs. In that sense, right? So, but I mean, Collins, what do you think then? I mean, if boreholes is not the answer, water is the scarcity. How do you think about, let's go, how do you think we want to think about the conversation we had, and how does the indigenous life itself, the indigenous lifestyle, could that provide us with an answer?
Yes, David. I think from Nanta has just mentioned, an aspect about the water harvesting, the rainwater harvesting concept. And I think in our previous discussions, I think Richard had also mentioned the aspect of yes, we have to develop new ways of getting that water, but then how do we deal with, for instance, currently in Kenya we have had the floods, El Nino, and it's a point I did mention last time that where did our water go? Like a few months from now, the water will be all gone, and probably the story now will be a different one. And maybe if I could just get back, maybe Nanta, back to what she shared about her experience before that, and what ideas she thinks through on how we can, rally this, not just about even the news getting it, but also bringing the water issue to the top agenda of the community, and how we can ensure that actually, if it's actually like rain harvesting and the water management and how we use that can help us along this journey. Yes, Nanta.
Thank you, Collins. I met a grandma a few days ago, and she shared something very interesting. She told me that no water goes to waste in her home. So she recycles the bathroom water, she recycles water from the kitchen, she recycles every drop of water that is used in her home, and that has really helped. So we are looking at integrating water access with climate change, and that way we can kill two birds with one stone. So the element of water reusing and water recycling is really an important aspect, and I'll still insist on water harvesting. If we for instance, in Kajiado, we are trying to come up with a policy that will make water harvesting a compulsory practice for people who are constructing new buildings. That means anytime you're putting up a structure, be it a rental structure or a business building, then you have to start with setting up a water harvesting infrastructure. And I have also interacted with individuals who use rainwater until another season of the rain comes, regardless of how long droughts are. So honestly, from experience and from people's stories, if we can harvest every drop of water that falls from the cloud and reuse all the water that we are using in our homesteads, then we would be somewhere to on the road to water availability.
Oh, thank you, Nanta. And maybe to the last bit before David comes in, how's the discussion about the water crisis taken into context with regards to the climate change issue? Because in most cases, I know, like for example, last year, the whole aspect of the drought and the loss of the livestock. Is this discussion about water something that the community is actually engaging, discussing, or what is on the top agenda as you have interacted with the communities?
Sure. Water is a top agenda, considering that everyone needs water. You want to keep livestock, you need water to sustain them. We are now teaching livestock keeping communities to slowly start doing mixed farming so that they're able to plant some trees at least, which can act as carbon sinks and which can also provide shade and prevent soil erosion and the likes. So having access to sufficient water is one way to help communities really diversify their livelihoods, because for the few people that have already embraced change, we have women groups that are already reusing their water, and they've started kitchen gardens. So they're doing kitchen gardens, and instead of incurring extra costs of buying water to water their vegetables, they are reusing and recycling water within their households, and that's working quite well. So yes, the discussion on water accessibility is a big agenda.
So,
Okay, thank you. Yes.
if I may, I mean, when a household uses water, when you describe it in that way, is that also using it for the livestock, or is that just for the household itself?
Sorry, David, you are quite low.
I was wondering that when a household is using water and recycling and preserving water, as you describe, is that with regards to their domestic use, or is that with regards to their livestock use?
That's with regard to domestic use.
Okay,
Okay.
so and I think it was also really interesting is this part where the trees, the row of the trees, the row of the natural vegetation and all those things, because we know that the more those are left, the more you lose shelter from the sun, the more sun bakes the ground, and the more sun bakes the ground, the less capable the ground is to provide at the next time that the rain comes. So being able to help regenerate it along is quite important. And of course, having a little bit of vegetation actually cools the ground quite a lot, as we know in our living in our cities, where we've lost the vegetation, the ground is extremely hot. And with some tree cover, it makes a huge difference in there in that way. So I think those are definitely really important elements along in there. How would you like to take the conversation, Collins?
Yes, thanks, David. I think from the sentiment from Nanta and what Philip shared earlier, I know maybe Kaka and the rest of the team joining have maybe further ideas, but I feel like creating more awareness about this whole aspect that Nanta has spoken about, not just like we want to drill some boreholes to get water, but how do we conserve the rainwater, and how do we combine that with the restoration of the environment, the trees aspect, and also she mentioned about the women aspect, because they bring in a perspective where if they're able to get a little bit of that water going into like the smart kitchen gardens, that in a way also helps to create alternative livelihoods in the cases where we have a drought that actually takes away the livestock, which is their main source of livelihood. And so for me, where I sit, it's like a whole a hybrid kind of approach where everyone is on the table to rally for a cause of action. And she mentioned about she met a grandmother, and I know, David, we have always spoken about this intergenerational aspect in our discussions. So for me, I think it's bringing every person on board. If my grandma can be able to do that in her household, then as young people, we have a responsibility to also contribute on how we can ensure that our communities are safeguarded from the crisis. Or maybe I'll ask Philip, maybe if he has something to respond on the discussion. Yes, Philip?
Yes, Collins. Thanks again. Well, actually, I really like to appreciate for the reactions to the matter, to the two options that we have, and it's actually great to hear from a professional like Nanda, who is actually in that field. So I didn't have that kind of statistics, but yes, I believe that harvesting rainwater actually can suffice. Despite the challenges that also come with it, because David mentioned something to do with management, that so whoever manages the water will now act like some cartel or something, and I believe that that's mismanagement is one of the great factors that one of the main challenges surrounding rainwater. I have mentioned something to do with dams. We've had people have dams, community dams for that matter. The dams get what do I say? Filled, with, for lack of a better word, with mud, and uh, you know, and it gets hectic to to drain them again. So yeah, but if we could find some very reliable ways of harvesting the rainwater, then I think there's enough rainwater to sustain for quite some time. Although the reason why I mentioned boreholes, it's because I'm thinking of a scenario like the past 2 years that we didn't have rain at all, and what could we have done, even if we stored rainwater in millions. We could reach a point that it could not um, you know uh, support the needs, because the animals actually require a lot of water for sometimes, so I'm talking of reliability. For how long could the rainwater sustain the households and the livestock, so yeah, it works, but for how long?
Well,
That's why I mentioned like, yeah, I understand the challenges around digging boreholes, more boreholes. That's actually much danger in that. Uh, but how reliable? For how long could rainwater also suffice? Or whilst we still trying to restore our natural environment, which will be able to bring the balance. But what could we do in the meantime? What could be done now? Because we've had floods. Who knows when it's going to rain again? So yeah.
For me, the conversations has kind of both offered a lot of its a lot of the possible solutions and also a lot of the concerns, really. And the last phrase you're using, where you say we've had floods, really kind of summarizes it all. What kind of reservoir can we create? How does the water flow? We heard a conversation from a lady, I've gone from which part of Kenya. She was talking about how they were using A-frames in order to work out the altitude, the flow of the land, so that they could dig trenches to capture the water. And in doing so, they've turned from being a semi-arid region to being able to restart agriculture. Simply by very simple actions, using basically sticks, but what you need to do is you need to understand which way the water is going to flow and how much you're going to capture along there. So that's one part of that. The other is I had a conversation with a gentleman from the Northeast region, and he was talking about how they took 40 liters from a borehole twice a week, which allows them to, 40 liters twice a week, 80 liters a week, 52 weeks in a year is 4,000 liters. So a 4,000 liter container is a year's worth of water. So that's kind of in kind of context of what you need. And of course, then you have a question of, okay, where do you place it? How big is that? If you actually look at 4,000 liters, it's not actually necessarily that big. But the question about the livestock is quite different, because as we heard last time, if you have 8,000 head of cattle, it's not going to survive through on 4,000 liters when you need that 4,000 liters yourself. So there is this economic management of understanding the cycle of when you actually need to sell your cattle. But then comes the question of what you actually invest it in. What is the natural investment for a Maasai community for the money that they get from investing from cattle? Vegetation doesn't work. Agriculture doesn't work, because if you don't have enough water for your livestock, you will probably find yourself in a drought, in a difficult situation trying to grow your agriculture as well, in some ways, right? So there's definitely a need for the right sort of technology. There's definitely a need for the right kind of approach. And then I think where we started from was this aspect of saying, what does the pastoral life itself help us? Because this aspect of where do you actually store the water, it may not be where you live locally, but that just as the drought seasons begin, the essence of the pastoral community is they move from location to location, depending on how the vegetation is, and in doing so, it actually gives life to the country, to the land, by that migration, by that pastoral path. So I think there's definitely an aspect where there's a localized aspect, and then there is a pastoral aspect, a movement aspect to it. And there's an aspect of how do you restore the forest where you are, and how do you actually bring about the regeneration of agriculture. But anyway, I see we have Kenta and we have Lenny just joined. I should hold off again and maybe hear their thoughts. And what I'd like to do, if I may, is to try and think of saying, how can we have is it possible to have a specific kind of ideas to follow up at the end of this and says, let's, maybe we can try this or that and so on. So, well, why don't you Collins, the people, and you just told me.
I'm taking the notes.
Yeah, from Baringo, right? The
Yeah, yeah,
lady who spoke about it.
Yeah.
yeah. I'm taking the notes, so probably we will be able to pick it up on the key points being shared. But I saw Ipato Kenta had joined us, and I would love to also hear his perspective on the discussion. Yes, welcome, Ipato. Okay, maybe as Ipato tries to connect with us, glad to have Lenny Langete with us. Lenny, I know you joined when we have had our discussion, but basically we are trying to highlight the story of water, and Philip and Nant have shared their perspective. And without probably preempting, you could introduce yourself and just share about how do you think the story of water and within your community, and what ideas do you have around solving this issue. Welcome. Okay, Lenny, we can't hear you. Maybe.
Sorry, how about now?
Oh yeah, perfect.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, thank you. My name is Lenny Lengete. I come from Kajiado County, Kajiado Central Sub-County, and a village known as Maparasha, as well as the founder of Pastor Climate Action. My contribution towards water, generally the perspective in my region is there is scarcity of water. It's a big challenge. We're having women trekking as much as 20 kilometers to the water source. We are having a lot of congestions in the water point, inadequate facilities of storage even during the rain season, minimum water dams. Dams doesn't exist at all. The little water pumps we have, they are not well constructed based on the technology used, because there is no any lining in any of the local water pumps. We are having a challenge generally of water in terms of availability, in terms of the quality of water that needs to be taken by the locals. So generally, the water to be taken as well for drinking is not good for consumption. The population is high generally because the population is growing as well. We are also seeing that there is a good number of return of cattle due to the purchase from the other regions. So the cattle number is always increasing. And we have a challenge as well since we don't have water for our livestock. So we also understand due to the harsh consequences of climate change, due to lack of water, we cannot keep hay or practice any further practices in terms of ranch management. Doing such practices also requires water. So generally in my region, water as a natural resource is an issue. We've been trying to advocate in our community to see how we can trigger the conversation to ensure that the little rains we are having, we will try to see whether we can harvest, but due to the financial constraint, it's been a burden as well. Regarding to the little bit, yes.
Just proceed, Lenny. I can hear you.
Yeah.
So regarding to my invitation to this forum, the Maasai, we are really at risk. We understand our local schools lack water. Even the rain harvesting approaches of conserving water is a challenge. The techniques doesn't exist. When it comes to what to sanitation and hygiene, I can say as well as malnutrition. Sanitation is a challenge generally in our schools, in our local facilities, in our local villages, and even in our homesteads. Reason being is because we lack water. And we understand also because of the essence of hygiene. We can say the level of hygiene is wanting. That has consequently resulted to a lot of diseases within. You can see in the late months when the school was not closed, you could realize that there was a lot of hygienic issues in our schools. So it's really sad, as well as the practices within the locals as alternative sources of livelihood. They don't exist. The reason being, as a pastoral community, we rely on cattle, and adopting other alternative sources of livelihood like farming, it's a challenge to us. Reason being is because of water as a natural resource. Lastly, we've seen that in the past years, a few attempts were made by the local community through contribution to the CIDP, that is the County Integrated Development Plan. We did some good blueprints, but the government never responded. So we are looking for interventions from any well-wisher who is ready to partake any actions to partner with us or to trigger any initiatives that will help us to contribute generally to solve the water issue in our region. Lastly, on management issues on water, the little water sources we are having due to the low literacy level and lack of technical expertise on water, we understand that these locals are not able to manage the little component of water they have. So to me, the level of water generally as the Maasai community is very minimal. And we will really wish to see any action from anyone that will enable us to escalate this component. Thank you.
Thank you, Lenny. Ipato, if you are with us, your contribution kindly.
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I'm sorry first of all that I joined late, and I've had the discussions from Sir Collins and from Lenny as well, and I support them. We've been having problems with water as the pastoral communities, and we need to know how well we can be able to curb these problems due to climate change. Now that we have different weather patterns, and like before, things have really changed, and we need to know how exactly we can be able to conserve this water so that when drought comes, we have no problem. As drought comes, our cattle will not die. So we need to know how exactly can we be able to conserve this water and make sure that we don't face the same problem every now and then. So I don't have much to say. I'll catch up with Sir Collins, and maybe he'll be able to tell me what you guys discussed before I joined, and we can be able to continue like that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kent. Yes, David, proceed.
You know, I think there is no one solution. I think the important thing to think about here is that you're not going to find one solution. It's not going to be borehole. It's not going to be a water pans. It's not going to be those sort of things. But it's going to be a combination of solutions. And the essence here is that there's an economic cost and economic benefit towards it. And you need to try to take it on from the perspective of saying, okay, how do I turn this into ways in which we can actually have economic benefits along in that way? So take let's just take the situation where you see the flood. How do you capture that water? what are the technologies that will help you capture that water? And they need to be simple technologies, because in a flood, anything which is a sophisticated and modern sort of electronic technology will fail, because electricity and water doesn't mix well. So that's one of the basic things that you kind of have to, bear in mind easily, because the floods are, the flow of the water is very fast and it goes along through. So it's about understanding the natural channel, the natural geography. When Nanta talks about growing trees, one of the aspects about trees is trees create their own microclimate because of the transpiration that goes through, and because of the shelter they keep from the sun, that it actually stops it from getting too hot, and there's always moisture going along, so you can trap the condensation, and it effectively helps in preventing, even though the warming may be happening along in that way. So I actually think that the aspect is that there's an initial sort of like a survey type period in a sense, which is what are the possible channels, what are the possible paths, and then to have an overlay onto that of saying, okay, boreholes, clearly I can make money from borehole. That's quite straightforward. Capturing water, technology that captures water, can be extremely useful, can be extremely profitable in many ways, and it can be a very useful skill. Profitable does not necessarily mean you have to sell it to be profitable. It can simply be it allows a livelihood. We spoke with a gentleman earlier today, Arewa, who you know, and he talked about how he helped some people to develop their skills, the graphic skills and so on, and so that they actually now make more than he does in that way. And in that way, it's become extremely profitable for him in that sense, because he benefits from the fact that they do really well. And those are kind of the dimensions that you can really look onto in there. So when I hear about all the different parts, what I fear is that we are looking at it too much as saying this is a problem, therefore we need to solve this problem here, as opposed to saying, okay, this is the landscape. At this landscape, how do I actually see around this? So we mentioned about the 100-kilometer Maasai Walk. That could be a way of actually surveying the country for where the natural water places might be. And it can be done as a tourist, as an external tourist trip to bring in revenues. And it can be done with an education part first. They start at the Wildlife Center in Nairobi, and they learn about indigenous life. So it's not just a tourist holiday. It's a part where they learn, as Abraham taught me when I went along, how you brush your teeth with a particular tree, with the wood from a particular tree. And you learn those things because on your walk, you will not have a toothbrush with you. And those are the things that you get to appreciate, and you get to treasure, and you get to value. And the fact that the walk then becomes a geological, a geographical survey, a hydrology survey that's actually being carried out by people who knows about animals, as opposed to be by engineers who looks at it as, oh, I can build a dam here, but doesn't understand how animals live. And the result of that survey is you now have some sense of quantity, and that can then say this sort of, livestock size. In the rainy season, they may grow to 8,000 heads, but you now have to be careful. So what do you invest in? What are the things that actually genuinely helps? That's not a straightforward consumption. And that investment, and there was a comment in one of the Facebook comments from the conversation the last time, who talked about education, that education becomes very practical from an early age. And we heard about many aspects of those from different parts as well, where people are taught, as Nanta was talking. And in fact, when I was visiting Kaka at his place, the young children there, they were planting beans or planting vegetables in that way. So you get to understand those things. So I think the danger is to see it as isolated crisis points and not enough of actually seeing it as saying, okay, here is what the landscape looks like. How can we actually take a broader perspective so that we can see the opportunities that it offers, how to reach back in some of the knowledge from before, how do we, if we want to stimulate trees to grow again, you can't do it everywhere all at once. Because the one lesson we have heard from many places along is that trees, when you plant a sapling, it's like when you have a baby. You can't just leave it outside and say, come back when you're 21 and you're fully grown and start paying me, giving me, some treats and bring that along. You kind of have to nurture it along. And we had a conversation with Rob the lad, who is been trying to regrow the Amazon rainforest. And he says every acre is different. And I imagine that's always going to be the case, because this acre has more sun, more directly. That one is sheltered by this one, if nothing else. And then this one has all the cows coming along with it, and they eat it up, whatever is growing, and that one doesn't, or something. And so I think that there is a short-term immediate thing, which is what we all tend to. If we can shape that short term to lean into the longer term, then it will work better. Otherwise, we end up spending a lot of money to try and cope with the short term. And when we do that, I'm pretty convinced climate change devastations is going to overrun all the things that we do. So you to navigate through it, you actually have to have some sense of that, what's achievable of that longer term, that regeneration. What does the landscape look like, even in the face of climate change? And along there, some things are very clearly necessary. Knowing which way water will run when it floods, that's clearly very important. Knowing where water is wasted, not in your home, but across the country, because that's where the water is free. Because you walk around the streets of Nairobi and water is wasted there. That's where the water is free. And the essence of what you need is to get those resources which are being thrown away, that is actually very valuable and useful, and you can take them along, and you can then see how they can be spread, and you may not need to take them all the way to every home, because each home may have enough, the 4,000 liters that I was talking about, but the animals may need to be going somewhere else. And that way you don't go from 8,000 heads down to 2, you might go down to 5,000 or whatever it is in different points. So I think that the answer is much richer and actually brings in much more of how the community can guide essentially what will become a big problem to the rest of the country. If water is going to be a problem to the Maasai, it's going to be a problem to every other tribe.
Yeah, that's almost a given. You're not going to see this happening in isolation. It just doesn't work like that. It will become a generic problem as time goes on.
But the Maasai uniquely has a perspective over the whole land rather than locally.
Yeah.
Or can have that. And I think that part is very important. So if you so the conversation so far very much focused on, you know, the 500 meters around where I live, in some sense. And some part of it has to deal with that because that's where I live, but it also has to focus on the 500 kilometers around where I live. And the immediate thing I would say, obviously, is, you know, how many ways can we think of storing water? It's like one of these challenges you want to take to a school and actually say, here's a competition, you know, how many ways can you think of storing water? And just draw them out, we'll have a go. And, you know, how many ways of storing water that doesn't need any money? How many
or very
ways?
little money.
And when, again, you know, when I visited Kaka, where he was, there was a large pond, and he was losing a lot of water every day. And there was a small pond that when I looked at it, I said, if water loss is just by evaporation from the sun, this pond should not be here, because in one day that water would be lost from the big pond. So what's the difference? And those sort of things, and my suspicion is either the lining of the pond itself, because animal feces actually line it and makes it waterproof, and also vegetation on top. And if you have a lot of sun and you have the duckweed type vegetation on top, they transpire hugely. They basically suck all the water up and pour it up into the atmosphere. They're kind of like a natural water pump that goes along. So maybe you those things. So one of the things of storing water is, you know, just sweep those vegetations off and eat it. That might be one of the things. And then what happens is, of course, the sun goes through the water, and the sunlight is a natural sterilizer. So you actually cleanse the water as well.
But you're still going to have quite a lot of evaporation if you have exposure to direct sunlight.
Then it might be you start having ponds with, you know,
cover,
partial covers or whatever it is, or you have different sort of plants.
Yeah.
You know, you can have plants that have, you know, maybe big leaves but don't evaporate as much.
Yeah.
And so.
But in my mind, it's going to become absolutely existential to be able to capture and store water when you're getting into these extremes of seasons. And like David said, there will be places that are naturally suited to storing the water and those that are not particularly suited to storing the water. So finding those places, because of the way the water will flow, also extremely important. And if you can combine that with, for example, a walk, and also actually make money from the people coming with you on that walk as a tourist event or whatever event we want to label it as, then it's actually two birds with a stone. Because in these kind of weather we are experiencing, there's going to be people all over the world in need of storing water.
If you think, you know, some numbers help, right? So Americans measure water in terms of acre feet, 1 acre, 1 foot deep. That's 1.2 million liters. If you think 4,000 liters, what we were talking about, is kind of sufficient if you're frugal with water to last a year, that's 300 households in 1 acre. If you think when you flood, the water floods to 1 foot, that's 300 households water in 1 acre. So having some sense of those numbers helps to get a sense of saying, actually, how much do I want to capture? How much do I need to capture? How can I capture? How can I share that between? And the nature of what we're seeing is not that you don't get water, but you don't get predictability of water.
Will come when you least expect it, and it never comes when you need it.
And it comes very fast, very quickly gone. So so understanding the lie of the land, having things in the right places in that way, I think they become really, really important in that sense. And then there are often natural places where water can stay, and then understanding what makes impermeable, permeable sort of places for water. So I think the steps is about looking at them and saying where can you make the research pay for itself. That's kind of very, very important. It's almost like you can make this as a, my son went to Arusha. He was a training as a doctor, and he went there and he paid for a certain amount to work with the hospital, and he got some experience and so on. And this is one of these things where you can imagine, engaging young engineering minds from around the world on a holiday type, 3-week things. You could possibly make it pay for itself if you follow what I'm sort of describing, because then it can be sustained along, and then you're in a position where you can choose what might come up, and you're actually making it into something which can be showcased along. It could be a competition that runs. There are these scrapyard challenges that a lot of engineering teams love doing, right? It's just like the football festival where you make an engineering festival. Here are the resources. The resources are what you see, nothing else. And then see what comes out. And the winner everybody enters by paying some amount to enter, and then there's a winner gets some portion. But as far as the community is concerned, they get ideas. Richard, sorry, yeah. I'm going to keep quiet now. But I think the main part of it, I don't think it's one solution.
No,
I think you have to look at it on many different scales. And some things worth bearing in mind is, like as I said, 1 acre feet is a lot of water. It's like 1.2 million liters. It's like 300 households. You don't fit 300 households in 1 acre.
Yeah.
I have a suggestion, team.
Sorry, Lenny. You're quite faint.
Yes.
You're very faint.
Thank you. Mine is a suggestion.
Okay.
I want Dr. David, right?
Yes.
Yes, Dr. David. I'm suggesting if we can do a template on what you expect from us in terms of research, in terms of what we need to identify, in terms of
Lenny, could you move close to your? I think you sounded much louder when you moved too close to your laptop.
All right.
You can lean up.
Now.
Yeah.
It's better the closer you come to the screen.
Thank you. So
actually, I don't think the earphone is working. Yeah, I think you're picking sound direct from the laptop.
Yes, I suspect that's the case.
how about now?
Good. Now it's pretty good. Yeah.
All right, thank you. So mine is a suggestion to Dr. David and the team that you can do as a template on what you expect from us to identify that we will find it useful for us to have a discussion. Then we can do an action plan on how we will keep things to keep on rolling. So at least we'll be having something that is getting established.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I think that's good. I mean, you throwing it back over, which I think is the right thing. Again, it's like football, right? You have to keep passing the ball, otherwise the game is just dull.
Yeah.
But I believe in things that are written down. At least we delegate and ensure that they're met in time.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep. That's a good thing to do. We should do that.
Absolutely, it's good, and I think I agree with Lenny, because otherwise we'll keep on we'll keep on the same having the same conversation. And I think I really understand what, David, you mean by having a short term and a long term project. I think what we need is just a plan, and once you have a plan, this will help us in the ground, because yeah, of course, you cannot stop floods from or rain from raining. It will keep on raining. We just need a solution, to ensure that we are safe during those calamities or those hard times. So let me just put my input when you talk about water for the masses. Just as we said the other day when we had this brilliant conversation, is that you realize that when we have shortage of water, or rather, water itself is life, and once it is not there, it will hinder a lot of things, especially the social things. For example, I think one of us mentions the issue to do with schools. Without water in these schools, you realize that life becomes so hard, even for the students to cope with the environment there. So you realize that it affects a lot of things, not just kettles. You realize that it goes to the academic level. And once the best thing nowadays, that the best thing you can give a kid, or the best thing you can give a society, is education. So actually, that is where personally I'm really concerned, and that is my circumference, the issues to do with education. So as we talk about this, as we come up with a plan, we should ensure that that is our angle to drive this. Our children should have a conducive environment in school, because we know most of us are here courtesy of the little education we have. That's why we are getting such networks and such connection to speak to such great people like David and Richard. So there's a sense at which we need to go back and see how this water, how the issue of this water. And I think, David, you mentioned in our last conversation very clearly that it is not just even about the mass size. When these kettles die due to this drought, you realize that we have a shortage of meat. The KMC, which is a company here which deals with meat, they registered a drop, on the product they have been receiving for the severe drought we had last season. And you realize that hinders the food security in the country, and even the one that we export. So it's a whole range. One, we solve the issues to do with water, coming up with plans. If we say it is boreholes, we do boreholes to the areas actually that are really needy. Because in this era, we want us to eradicate the issue of walking 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers in search of water. And again, there is a conversation we had last time to modernize things, to bring new ideas to these people. If it is keeping the livestock, of course, we have our way of, bring some technology on this. Like last week, we had a conversation on the way of farming, the new technology way of farming, the smart farm, and something, the kitchen garden, where you can have your own food that will sustain you. And you realize that a lot of money that you're going to use in the market, probably to buy those vegetables, you will use them probably in school fees or some other things. So you will save them because you are. But all this surround on the issues to do with water. When we have water, all this is going to happen. So that's my input on this. But I do believe and I agree with Lenny what he has spoken about, having a plan and a written plan that is down on paper, so that when we go to the ground, we implement it and we put our input on solving the problems that are there. That's my input. Thank you.
I have a last inquiry.
Thank you, David.
Maybe
Yes, Lenny.
a kickback to the team as well. Based on statistical indicators in Kenya regarding to our discussion, it's always good. We will also have a consideration on the same. That if there is any national postulations based on water availability in the Masai in terms of integrity issues in management, in terms of availability, in terms of quality, in terms of quantity, I'll recommend we'll also have a consideration on the same, that whatever we are embarking on realistic approaches towards the matter of discussion.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
hope I'm clear
Yes,
with that.
absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely. I think this aspect. I think there's a, there's definitely an aspect of kind of. I think that there's an aspect. I was a physicist, so I still think like a physicist and work like a physicist. So I was a university lecturer in physics at Oxford, and I had a kind of prestigious physics fellowship and so on. And there are these things about water that we tend to forget. There's plenty of water in the air. There are many ways of extracting water from air. Some of the ways are very, very simple. When air speeds up, it's made to pass through a small area, a smaller area, and it's made to speed up. Its temperature drops. When air temperature drops, water condenses. So there are ways in which you can actually make water condense out of the air. And these are things which can be done locally in different areas. You may not condense them enough to drink, but you may condense them enough for the roots of plants to take, because plants are really good at taking water. So it may just make the soil a little bit moist, but that may be enough for the plants to take. And if you can get the plants to take it a little bit, then you can actually have the next kind of level of plants and other things that might be possible along. So there's a lot in terms of thinking about how to manage the land with a little bit of technology to help. Because the land is not going to work by managing it the way it used to be, because the weather system has changed. So there needs to be something else added on to help it along, but these things can be very simple in that way. A little bit of shade just to take out some of the sun may take off enough heat and may introduce the sort of things that can be done. So there's a degree of sort of experimentation, and that goes into what I wanted to respond back to David's comment about education. In that when people used to grow up in communities like that, they learn about traditional ways of doing things, and so these can be complemented by basic, simple ways in which physical systems can be made to work for you a little bit more. How you can make a little fan, how the fact that water just flows downhill and those sort of things can be made to help you along in those ways. So I think the plan and the action, you want it so that there is some short-term result, so that it's interesting, so that it attracts people along. But the short-term answers are probably not going to be sufficient to cope with the problems that we're going to face, because oil and gas and coal is going to carry on increasing. The extremes of the climate is going to carry on increasing. We are going to have to think about, being hotter, so you can't. The number of hours you can be outside is restricted. Shelter for animals. Trees take a bit of time to grow, so maybe different types of trees become necessary. Used to be the case when you look at in America, they have these things where there's a cattle drive, where the herds of cattle are moved from one area to another. Sometimes, and a lot of it is because this is to go from one area of pasture to another area of pasture. You've eaten all the grass here, it's time to go to another bit and eat those so that you don't overgraze and you move along in that way. And here maybe grazing on the trees become too much because it becomes dry on the ground and stuff, and you want to preserve the trees and you want to plant them in different stages. So I think there is a whole mix, and finding out what works is a program over time. Setting that program in terms of the economics so that the program itself produces revenues would make it really work. Because if you need to be relying on money from the government, from another authority, and so on, it's just going to get stuck there. Or at least I very much think it's just going to get stuck there because everyone is running out of money. There will be plenty of pledges and commitments, but the actual delivery, yeah, I'm skeptical.
Yeah, it's true. Thanks, David. So maybe for if Kenta, are you still with us? Probably, I know it's getting late for a few guys in Kenya.
Yeah.
It's getting
It's
midnight,
getting
and
very late for you guys.
To get maybe their final remarks as we get to the close, and maybe on this aspect, David, you mentioned about the work. I will also, as we conclude your final remarks, how you see that getting us maybe even off started for this project, like something as David mentions that we may not need money to kick it off, but in a sense, it's also an activity that helps us to generate some livelihoods out of it. So, Kenta, if you are with us, maybe your final remarks.
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk about the works. So as David mentioned, we have to look for something that will help us also not only, doing something that does not bring maybe profit or maybe income for us. So we need to look at the works in the tourism aspect. And I think I'm going to look into that in details and see how exactly we can be able to bring the aspect of tourism into this idea so that it can not only be, benefiting only the community, it can also be bringing income in the tourism perspective. So I don't have much to say. The discussion was very nice. I really learned a lot, and looking forward to having more discussions and see how we can be able to bring these solutions to the table. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just thinking, things like the Paris Dakar race, right? Is a rally race, cars race through a desert, basically. And it doesn't seem like what you want, but the fact is that what happens is people are attracted to challenges. And if you can tell the story of the challenge well, you can attract a lot of people to come and actually be the ones who come with the ideas and face the challenges, and it becomes an event. It becomes a global event, where where this side of it is this is a holistic healing event. How do you heal the planet in that way? And you want to attract engineers, you want to attract kind of people along, or particular kind of task, in some sense, right? You know, how do you store water in a desert when it rains, when it floods? And no, you can't just ship 50,000 tons of concrete from somewhere else and block up the land, because that's not what this is about, kind of thing.
No.
So really sort of thinking back. And if you look back in longer history, then you find lots of architectural structures of how people had created in Persia, in places like that, in desert areas, in order to create ice, in order to condense water, in order to do those things. And they become part of it. And this other aspect is essentially identifying spots which can become oases. And you could, if you can identify a spot which has kind of clay type soil, whatever it is, so that it goes there, can become an event itself to create an artificial lake or something along the way. That brings people along, and it can get lots of attention. And getting that lot of attention is what benefits everyone else in that way, right? Because there'll be commerce, there'll be interest, there'll be kind of other things that come out of it.
Sure.
But as Lenny is saying, writing it down so that it's on paper, so that it's guided along, so that it can be then be structured into saying, okay, that's too far ahead, that's whatever it is, these are the steps, so that we can then say, okay, in order to take the next step, these conversations should be had. We need to have these conversations. I think that's kind of the way. Otherwise, it's just lots of talk, and it doesn't become projects.
It doesn't become tangible and real.
Yeah.
And you're at the phase where this is very real.
That's true. Maybe Philip, you are, final remarks.
Yeah, thanks again, Collins. Well, we've talked, and we've, we all agree that water is a very important resource, and we will have to now come up with something other than just the talks. So I like the idea of David, to integrate technology. So we can integrate technology in harvesting the rainwater. I can integrate technology in, because I understand that water, according to the little science I have, water is 72%. The world is 72% water. I don't know if that's true, but I guess there's enough water out there for all of us. I think we just need to now see how to manage it, because I believe there's enough water out there. So we need to put the things on paper. We need to have timelines. We need to do some research. We again, mentioning the walk, I think it's one of the main events that we now need to look forward to now start planning on how to do the work. Probably in a few weeks or so. So so I guess that's it for now. But I would like to say thanks a lot, David and Richard. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your concern. To our community, and we really appreciate, and God shall bless you for that. And for the rest of the team, let's continue doing the little things we do. I know most of us are in organizations. Let's keep partnering with other stakeholders. Let's also not forget the community. I mean, the communities themselves, the leaderships, the elders. They'll always advise on the best ways to come up with solutions to this issue. So I guess that's it I can say for now. Wish you guys a good time.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
David, then?
Thank you, Collins. I'll try to be brief. On my final remarks is this: yesterday, while we were having the prayer and meditation, the lady was taking us through. Really spoke about love, and I think we are here because there is an extension of that love, and with that love, with that essence of love, we want to make the world better, and to ensure that all of us will have a smile during hard times and even good times. So the little we are doing, the little I am doing, the little you are doing is really what will make the world better at the long run. And for this, I just want to thank David and Richard for even coming on board and being with us. Actually, this is already a start. Having us here, I've realized a good number of the delegates here come from the community we are talking about. And therefore, having them here, you already have a representation. And the voices that you heard is the voices from the ground. And I believe we become
I think he just lost his connection, right? Not sure if he's going to get back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's back.
he's back.
Oh, sorry. You seem to have. Okay, maybe
Yeah.
Lenny, your final remarks, Lenny.
Okay, thank you, Sir Collins, and the entire team. My party shot is appreciation to Dr. David and Richard. Thank you for your consideration to the Maasai community to come with such an idea. It's something that will transform lives. It's an impact to each and everyone in the future to come. And we are grateful because of that idea. Secondly is let's execute the plan. Let's execute the plan in having it in a blueprint. We can do assignments to each and every one of us based on what you can submit to the table, based on what you can contribute. And with that, everything will be set on road. I really appreciate the contributions I've had from each and everyone. You can feel the love for the community. You can feel the need for that humanity to everyone to ensure that everything that is worth to have in life in terms of natural resources is a consideration to us. So we really appreciate, and we are looking forward to see what will come in this exercise. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lenny.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, I think we seem to have lost Kaka.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's been great hearing from you guys and Lenny and the rest of the team, as you have said. David M told us last time that the voice from the ground is actually the real story about it. So take it up. Feel free to talk, to reach out and say, hey, you know what, we are picking this. Make the first step. and I believe it's possible.
Yep.
Let's
Absolutely.
rally about. So
Well, we have some homework, so we'll do
Yes.
some homework, and then
yes,
and
Like
I
being
think that's
back
a
in
good thing.
school.
Yes.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. We will close this segment of our evening.
Yeah.
And then if you guys get a chance later, we were going to play a recording we had with a remarkable lady, Australian Bronwyn King, who is who for probably about a decade and a half has been working on the aspect of how we shouldn't be investing in tobacco. And her story reflects a lot of the comments and thoughts today about whether we should be investing in extracting oil, gas, and coal in a similar way also. So
Absolutely.
so we had a conversation with her this morning, very early our time, very late in Australia.
Yeah.
And so we'll be playing it during the last hour of our segment so that it may be very early in her time.
Exactly. No, she's a remarkable force for good. She has taken a very big stance against tobacco and worked on it for quite some time. But she's a doctor who saw the first-hand experience of what smoking does to people.
And you know, the one thing I got from that actually is this very human story. We often tell the story of the big devastation and the big disasters. We don't really tell the personal stories enough of the problems the climate devastation causes.
No.
And there's a different way of telling those stories, so that they are not about how disaster is going to come on everyone, but simply, we are people together.
Okay.
It's a great clip. Absolutely
okay.
great clip. And she's a remarkable woman.
Sure. Looking forward. Thank
Okay.
you.
Good.
Sure.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. So I'm just going to.
Yes, I think we started.
Well, we should just say we're finishing with Abraham and Kaka. So
Yeah, I just joined.
Yes.
I just joined, and I really had a lot to share, but I promise next time.
Yep. So we're just
I'll-
closing and going on to our
Yeah.
next segment. So next time we will
Okay.
come back along there, and Kaka as well. So with the power and everything. So okay. Good night. Look after yourselves.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay. So and here we're just in time for our next segment.
Indeed. Recorded freshly this morning, our time, evening time in Melbourne, where Bronwyn is based.
Yes. And I do find, again, this is really interesting, right? This aspect where we get caught by the immediacy of our problems. And sometimes we fail to see today with us, Dr. Bronwyn King, as part of our It's For You, the antidote to COP28, the way we'd like to call it. Basically, because we like to actually talk about what people actually do rather than what we want to go and protest placards and demands or say it's not enough and all those things. And Dr. Bronwyn King is a remarkable person we were very fortunate to have been introduced to earlier. She's been awarded the President's Award. She's a King's Distinguished Fellow. She has been championing basically health and the aspect by which smoking and the consequence of smoking is all tied up, and the sources and the origin and the problems associated with all tied up very much with our vested infrastructure that's very much centered around the big companies in a way, what we do with our portfolios, and of course oil and gas and coal have their role somewhere within there as well. And she's also been awarded the Order of Australia, I believe. Is that right? But you know, you're the person really who's quite remarkable. So we Richard and I, we are very privileged to have you, to be able to have a bit of your time to be able to speak with you. And what we'd like to do is just to have a conversation really about what people do, what you do in that way. So I'll hand over to Richard.
Well, thank you so much, Bronwyn, for being here with us today. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that you're a tremendous force for good. And you have a background and this honor list that just mesmerizes me when I go through your webpage. So what at the very first time set you on this course? You're a doctor by the education, so you had first-hand experience of what smoking does to people. And from that moment on, you decided to take a slightly different track.
That's it.
What
happened? It's
what was the moment that you said, you know what, this cannot go on? I've seen so much bad things here. I actually need to take some other form of action rather than my medical action to deal with this.
It's a great question, and thank you so much to both of you for having me today and for having this discussion. Your question is a very good one because I've certainly had a very unusual career path, and I'm still not exactly sure where it's going, but it's certainly a very interesting one. At the start of my medical career, I was interested in a whole range of different specialties. In fact, I was very interested in sports medicine because I used to be an elite swimmer, and I dreamed of being an Olympic swimmer. I didn't quite make that goal, but I actually worked as the team doctor for the Australian swimming team for about 10 years. So I thought, let's specialise in sports medicine. That was my main interest. Then I met this brilliant professor who was a radiation oncologist, and like many doctors who are interested in many things, sometimes it's a great mentor who will end up leading you towards your specialty. And so that's what happened with me. I just met this great doctor and I thought, oh my gosh, I want to be just like him. And he is and he's retired now, but he was one of the world's best lung cancer doctors. And he's absolutely fantastic role model and an inspiration to an entire generation of radiation oncologists. So that's what set me on that path. And during the studying and the working to become a radiation oncologist, obviously I was confronted with cancer every day. And even though many people are fully aware that tobacco causes cancers, seeing the impact of tobacco close up every day was really quite something. And my first job in radiation oncology was working on the lung cancer ward at the biggest cancer centre in the Southern Hemisphere here in Melbourne. And lung cancer is a very nasty disease. It's overwhelmingly caused by smoking, and most of my patients started smoking when they were children or teenagers. And despite living in a very wealthy country with access to all sorts of terrific medicine and sophisticated technologies, nearly every single one of my patients died. And that was my first job out of med school. And I was 25 years old, and I was the person who was charged with ringing relatives, often in the middle of the night, asking them to rush in to quickly say goodbye to their loved one. And often their loved ones were in their 40s or 50s or early 60s, and they were saying goodbye. That was it. They were losing decades of life, and families were left completely lost because of these very precious family members that were dying as a result of tobacco. And it really hit me very hard because I liked my patients and I liked the families, and I'm a people person, and I got into medicine because I wanted to help people and do good things, not because I wanted to watch them die. And to cut a very long story short, 10 years after that first job, I was working as a specialist by them at the same hospital, and my husband and I decided to buy a house. And we sat down with the accountant, and the accountant said, look, you two need to sort out your money. How much money do you have left in your pension plan? How much money do you have in your pension plan? And up until that moment, I'd never, ever thought of pension plans in my entire life. I knew that Australia had a compulsory pension system, but that was it. I didn't know the name of my pension plan. I'd never signed a form or looked at anything to do with pension plans. I'd just sort of heard of the word. But I'm a very obedient person. So the accountant says, sort out your money. So I organised to meet with the pension plan representative for all of the healthcare workers at that massive cancer hospital. And it was March of 2010. We sat down over coffee in the cafeteria at the hospital, and we had a nice little chat. And this pension plan representative showed me some paperwork and showed me how much money I had. And we had a pleasant conversation. I had my latte. I shook his hand. The meeting finished and I walked away. And completely as an afterthought, I rushed back to him and I said, oh, by the way, was I meant to tell you what to do with that money? And he said, no. It's all taken care of. You're in the default option. Okay. And I said, oh, option, does that mean there are other options? And he looked at me and he rolled his eyes at me and he said, oh, look, there is this one special option for people who have a problem with investing in mining alcohol or tobacco. Ooh. And then and I said, did you just say tobacco? And he said, yes. And I said, so are you telling me I'm currently investing in tobacco? And he said, oh, yeah, everybody is. It's completely normal. Don't worry about it. And that was it. That was my moment. Right then, right there in the cafeteria, in the biggest hospital, in the biggest cancer hospital in the Southern Hemisphere. And I just thought, I just can't let that go. I cannot let that go. And that sent me on a completely new path.
That's what an actual Minsky moment looks like, I guess. And the rest is history, as they say.
That's it.
And your work is tremendous. You are very well known for your stance and your efficiency in arguing both the financial and the medical argument for why this should happen. So you're combining the two into one mission almost, if one would like to say so. What have been the biggest obstacles on this journey when you made your case for why we should actually not have something that is effectively killing the customers in our portfolios? It doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make medical sense. What were the forces that were saying, Bronwyn, that's all well and good, but there's a lot of taxes being paid by these companies, a lot of duties. They're not such a bad guys. Why are you clamping down on them so hard? What were the forces really that tried to slow down your view and your statement and your mission that you embarked on? Did you encounter lots of vested interests and lots of people that were effectively lobbyists for the industry?
No, look, I set up Tobacco-Free Portfolios, which is an NGO, and we work with the finance sector to invite them to reconsider commercial relationships with tobacco companies. And instead of investing and insuring and lending money to tobacco companies, we ask them instead to stand alongside the health sector, governments, parents, communities, and reject tobacco. So the conversations that I have are generally with finance leaders. I would say in all that time, over 13 years, the biggest barrier to going tobacco-free would be, I think it's human nature to just have great comfort in the status quo. Humans, we're very simple creatures. We like doing exactly what we did this morning, and we like doing the same thing tomorrow, and we like doing it the next day and the next day. And, it's as simple as, if you've ever been on a bus trip with a group of people, wherever you sit in the morning is usually where you sit after you get off for the morning break and the lunch break. You just sit in the same seat. I mean, we're human beings we're programmed to love doing the same thing over and over again. So when I first went to the finance sector and I met very senior figures in finance who'd been doing the same thing for 20, 30, 40 years, and then I was asking them to do something differently, which was really just consider building a sustainable finance framework. And as part of that, get rid of tobacco. Apply an exclusion to the tobacco sector. That's it. But applying an exclusion was something, certainly 13 years ago when I started this work, it was something that mainstream financial institutions did not do, really none of them. Certainly none in Australia. I mean, very rarely around the world. The only organisations that had an exclusion policy back then were very small boutique, religious-focused institutions, or there was one very boutique, small, ethically labelled financial institution. But they were certainly not considered mainstream, and they were only a tiny portion of our overall finance sector in Australia, and it was really the same all around the world. So asking senior finance folks to change their thinking after decades, that was and probably still is the biggest challenge to our work. Because as you pointed out, sure, there are medical arguments, there's financial arguments, there's regulatory arguments, there's human rights arguments, there's environmental arguments, there's social license arguments. There's really every lens or angle that you'd like to take, in fact, leads you to go tobacco free once you think through it. So the key is being open to considering change, being open to having a conversation, and I think that it takes a bit of courage for leaders to do that. So I'm always looking for a courageous leader.
What about your colleagues at the time? I mean, when you realized there was the default option and there is this, oh gosh, not one of those, kind of tobacco-free, whatever those were called. Can't even remember now. But anyway, those other options. I'm sure you must have went back and had a word with your colleagues, and did they all say, well, I never looked at it, or?
I did. So actually, every Friday afternoon at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre, one of the radiation oncologists was invited to present a research study or a case study on a recent interesting patient. This happened every Friday afternoon. And shortly after I found out, it was probably only a month later, it just happened to be my turn to present to all of the other radiation oncologists on Friday afternoon. And so instead of presenting my most interesting patient of late or an interesting research study, I presented this. I did a little bit of homework and I presented exactly along the lines of what you said. And I showed everybody what I had found about my pension plan. And by then, I had found out that 4 of the top 5 holdings in the international shares portion of my portfolio, and back then I was about 50% of my portfolio was international shares. 4 of the top 5 holdings in international shares were tobacco companies. So I found that extraordinary at the time. I mean, even saying it now, it is ridiculous to think that that would be just the default option for a cancer doctor. But anyway, that's what it was. And so I presented that to all the radiation oncologists in the room, including Professor David Ball, the professor who'd inspired me to become a radiation oncologist in the first place. But everybody in that room was fully aware of the impact of tobacco on humanity. Everybody. It's very hidden from the general population, but it is not hidden from oncologists. We know exactly what tobacco does, and it is horrific. And so when I presented it to the group, they were all very uncomfortable. There was a lot of shifting in chairs. And they certainly supported me in my early attempts to engage with the pension plan for all of the healthcare workers at the hospital. And so I knew straight away that it wasn't just me that would care about this. I knew that other people were going to care. And the more I found out about the issue, I realised it wasn't just our pension plan. It was all pension plans in Australia. They invested a little bit of money in all of the companies listed on the big stock exchanges, including tobacco companies. That was just how the system worked. And then I learned it wasn't just pension plans, it was also insurance agencies. And it wasn't just insurance, it was banks and asset managers. And then, of course, I learned it wasn't just Australia, it was the entire world. The whole global finance sector was entirely tangled up with the global tobacco industry and had been for decades and decades.
So how did they feel between, gosh, there must be a money reason why it's so heavily in the tobacco side, and my everyday where I'm treating all the people? Because in many ways, that's kind of this conflict between, what we see as a social good, and my daughter's a junior, is starting as a doctor, at the moment, and she sees a lot of things going on in that way. And then there is the other side of, she asks the same question: what do I do with my money? And that compartmentalization, essentially, which drives our world in some ways, right? It says, go do the good thing, don't think about that when you actually think about your money.
I think it does, and I think the world, I mean, that was 13 years ago, and I think the world is in a very different place right now, which is fantastic. I think that consumers around the world are realizing that there's a lot of power in the way they live their lives. And obviously, the way you spend your money and invest your money is one thing, and that's what I'm focused on. But it's also just the choices you make in everyday life. I mean, if do you choose fast fashion, or do you save up and buy one nice pair of shoes that is going to last you for 2 years? Mm-hmm. Do you buy an electric car, or do you go and buy a massive gas guzzling SUV? Every choice we make at the moment is, I mean, obviously it's every choice we've ever made, but I think at the moment people are now far more aware that the choices they make have an impact on the world, but they also have an impact in encouraging the greening of the world, in reducing carbon footprints, and improving a rapid transition to a more sustainable future.
That speaks to our call in It's For You, which is to redirect your spending to those you think are making the world better. And that's
it. And I think that you mentioned it was your daughter. I think, the next generation will just do this by default. I think that, for people of my age, we're still having to think it through a little bit because we've taken our time to get there. But I think for young people today, it's just going to be an automatic way of life. And part of helping that happen is an increase in transparency. Companies need to be much more transparent about the impact that they have, not just the product at the end, but the supply chain, the operations of the business itself, and the product and the disposal of that product, or the life cycle. Can the product be repaired? Companies need to be more transparent about that. Companies that are doing really well on any of those metrics need to be rewarded so that people can, in fact, really learn about what they're doing. Hopefully other companies will copy, but hopefully customers will reward them with their money, and it will be a really positive cycle where the market will take care of it sort of naturally as people express and display a clear interest for sustainable products.
That makes sense, and that's a very capitalist solution, that you actually get rewarded for doing the right things, and those who do not do the right things. Nowadays, we have the information ability to find those organizations, those companies that really not playing by the rules. And consumers today, perhaps, like pointed out by you both, are more prepared than previous generations. Let alone when you get to mine and David's age, that was a very, very different story. But we also did not have that kind of information. The internet was a tremendous source of good.
You didn't have the choice. You didn't even know. But I mean, I was really like that too. I didn't know. I never selected my pension plan. I certainly didn't select which option. I didn't even know there was more than one option. So this is it. If you don't even know, how can you possibly make a choice that aligns with the world that you want to see? So I think that transparency, choice, and I think carrots and sticks are important. Carrots to reward companies doing good things and let the market take care of itself. But absolutely, companies need to be held to account for the negative impacts that they're having on the world more broadly. I mean, I think tobacco companies are the ultimate example in terms of the shocking impacts they have. They don't pay anything in terms of the medical or hospital bills for patients. They don't pay for, they don't give any compensation to the people, who are suffering terrible illnesses. They don't pay out families when people die. They are not held to account for the shocking impacts they have on humanity. But in addition, they're not held to account for the shocking environmental impacts they have on the world in terms of ocean plastic. I mean, cigarette filters are the #1 ocean plastic. For deforestation, 5% of all trees chopped down, 5% in the world, are chopped down to burn underneath hanging tobacco leaves to cure the tobacco leaves. And this causes a shocking sort of carbon footprint on the world that tobacco companies are not paying for. In the same way, oil and gas companies, any company that is causing a negative externality in the natural world needs to be held to account for that, because ultimately the community is paying, taxpayers are paying, all of us suffer, yet it's the company that is inflicting that negative impact while making profits. So it's really a false business model. And I think everybody is calling into account these business models that are allowing those negative impacts on the world to go unaccounted for.
Yeah, it's very inspiring to hear you talk. You're a tremendous public speaker, by the way. You should be on air all the time. Are you sensing that what you are describing as a process is gathering steam because of this increased ability of people all over the world to actually gather the information, to understand the impact of what the company's products that they are buying are causing? Because my sense is that the moment, with 2 children in their 20s, they are infinitely more cognizant and read up on subjects that interest them than I ever was at their age. I was very insular and couldn't really, and we didn't have the ability to gather the information in the way they do.
This is the big key to the difference, isn't it? I mean, you've got all the information in the world in your pocket, and your kids can make choices in seconds. They can also report things that they're unsatisfied with or dissatisfied with or appalled with. They can put that on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter and immediately find a massive community of people across the world that's also not happy. And suddenly the company is going to take notice and may indeed even change their practice because of being called out on social media. So I think the tools that your children have at their disposal are full of potential. And I know I jumped in there, but to say in terms of, do I think that now we're getting to this point? I do think we're getting to a tipping point of sorts. Obviously, today's the last day of COP28. I think it's been an amazing conference. We've certainly in Australia had daily coverage of what's been going on. And I do feel that for the first time, the world seems to have a solidarity around saving itself that we haven't perhaps seen, certainly not in this magnitude before. I feel like the urgency is much more clear. And I also feel this incredible sense that people will just not tolerate propaganda anymore. It doesn't matter who you are. If you stand up and say you don't believe in the science, or you don't believe in climate change or whatever, it's just, we're done with that. The science is clear, it's accepted, and the propaganda is no longer resonating. I think that people also, especially this year, 2023 has been an extraordinary year for climate disasters all throughout the world. I mean, even here in Australia, our summer's just coming now, but everybody here really followed very closely the shocking bushfires in Canada that burned for months and months and sent casts of enormous plumes of smoke all over New York City. There's been floods, shocking floods and landslides, in Libya, in Africa, in Asia. There have been so many terrible natural disasters this year. And again, once upon a time, sometimes those natural disasters would almost be hidden or not reported on. But in 2023, if a natural disaster occurs anywhere, we see vision of it. It's right in front of our eyes immediately in real time. And so I've also got this sense that there's nowhere to hide anymore. There's these terrible impacts are coming. They're here already. They're coming more frequently. Everybody in every country is at risk. And everyone who has any position of influence needs to use that influence to try to create a more sustainable world as quickly as we can in the most just and fair way that we can, so that we can continue to enjoy the natural environment on which we absolutely depend.
Wow. That should be broadcasted all over the world.
But I think this part which we obviously we feel very similar with you in that way. I think we mentioned before about the necessity to have a mechanism to bring this about. Because our use of we did a poll. Not many people responded, but we did a poll to ask, when you create 1 unit of your renewable energy, how many units of your dirty coal, gas, and oil energy should you take away? And one of the options, there were 4 options. One was 100%, it's like for like, and then it was 50, and then it was 0. And one of them was just for the hell of it. We thought we put in increase both, and increase both came out to be the most popular as the perception of it. I think this is similar to the sense from the compartmentalization in some sense, of my money in one place and I have my good works in another. As long as I keep doing my good works, I'm okay if I keep my money in there. In that way, I think many people end up feeling a little bit in that way too, and end up feeling that at the end of the day it needs to be someone else who does it rather than me, because I'm only little me, and what can I do?
Look, I think that feeling can be overwhelming. I think for anybody, the idea that you're just one person and it's just not going to make a difference. But the truth is, there are 8 billion of us now, and 8 billion little actions adds up to a great big change. But I don't think it's just about 8 billion people doing one thing differently. I think that it's 8 billion people calling on 8 billion mayors of cities, 8 billion state leaders or regional leaders, 8 billion prime ministers, and 8 billion people calling on prime ministers and presidents to change things at a systemic level. I mean, it's true. Does it matter tonight if here in Melbourne, if I put my trash out and I divide it perfectly into the right recycling and green waste and regular waste? Does that matter? I can see how people can think, oh gosh, I can't save the whole world myself. But there are political processes that democratic societies allow people to participate in, and everybody with a voice needs to use their voice to advocate for their political representative to put climate on the agenda, to put sustainability on the agenda, so that we can, well, first of all, stop damaging the world so much, and then put in measures so that we can adapt to some of the climate change that is going to happen, regardless of what we're able to do today, and then measures to try to undo some of that damage and to restore nature wherever we can. And yes, it's overwhelming, and yes, it's a massive task, but humans are pretty amazing people. We're very creative, we're very innovative, and now, given that we're also connected all over the world, I do believe that anything is possible, but we just need to get on with it and hurry up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have this aspect where what we want to call for is to create a new market to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground, where effectively, if you think about it, is these are mineral rights, and you can own mineral rights. You can go and buy a lump of coal and keep it in your bed and never let it see the light of day. From that point on, and you can do those things. So you can do that with a lump of coal. But Santa used to come along, give you lumps of coal, as it were. If you, but so the idea is simply that to be able to have it. So if a couple were getting married and they're getting their wedding rings, they get it from a place where part of the money will go actually into buying some of those mineral rights and keeping them in the ground. Or if you go to study, you want to prefer to go to a place where part of your fees go, or you work for an employer who will give you a pay rise and will match it with an amount to keep it in there, so that when you work for that employer, you're actually working to accelerate that kind of transition along. I think part of the difficulty about creating something like that is letting people become aware that actually this is an action that can be possible. And generating that awareness generates the market, because then the investors will come along and say, you know what, this actually, people will pay for this. and therefore we actually have this opportunity to be able to look at them as minerals that you can make money from by keeping them in the ground, rather than minerals that you make money from by burning them and poisoning the rest of us.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a super interesting idea. And I think this is exactly what I was saying. Humans are clever and come up with all sorts of innovative ideas. I think that is an innovative idea that, you know, I'd love to read more about and learn more about. And I think there won't just be one solution. I think there are going to be hundreds of solutions that some will, you know, some of them will be very local and dependent on the country and the environment in which people find themselves. Some of them will be cross-country, international initiatives. Some will require a complete breakdown and a rebuilding of systems. But I think we should, you know, really open our minds to everything that might have the potential for accelerating change in the right direction. And it might also involve a bit of trial and error. You know, see what works, see what people are attracted to, see how it goes. And I think that's one of the keys to innovation. Don't let sort of negativity hold you back. It's worth trying out some of these ideas and just seeing which ones work the best. And if multiple ideas work, go for it. I think that there's going to be a huge amount of room for innovative ideas when it comes to building a more sustainable world.
And going back a little bit and just thinking, we had a segment for part of our birthday's book called Who's Tipping Over the Tipping Point? And it's a comedy segment to keep you laughing sustainably. And surprisingly, one of
there's not that much to laugh about, you know, so I need to listen to this. Yeah.
Oh well, it's yeah, basically we largely talk about products and what really shouldn't be there or should be there. And one of the first things that came up was things like vapes and disposable vapes. And from the tobacco side, I mean, do you find those as actually giving them a new life, or is that actually something that you see as being very different? Or presumably all that I've seen about it is jury is still out about their damaging effects, potential damaging effects. But I tell my children,
the jury's not out. Yeah, no. The jury's not really out. We know that they're not safe. It's just how dangerous they are over what time period. So we know for sure they're not safe. But I think that, as you pointed out, if you just look at the issue of vaping as a business model through an environmental lens, they get a big black cross, because any business model in 2023 that relies on the production of hundreds of millions of units of single-use plastic is not an acceptable business model. Full stop. That's just insane. It doesn't make any different. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever to consider that as a viable business model when we're talking about rapidly changing business models to make them more in line with a world where nature is respected. And just the idea that you would even suggest such a business model is sort of the antithesis to authentic sustainability.
Yeah, that's I think an aspect that is not really pointed out enough in the media, the fact that they do use these materials and they only get used once, but you do see them everywhere, actually, in various trash or non-trash locations. So there must be an enormous amount of plastic that have effectively emerged because of this epidemic, if you want to call it that.
That's it, exactly. And we don't even know. That's it. And at the moment, we don't know, where is all that plastic ending up? It's either ending up on beaches, in oceans. It's not being, there's no program to clean it up or to talk about safe disposal. But the fundamental problem is the business model itself. The product is the problem. So it's
right.
These companies want to sell products that are fundamentally unsustainable. I mean, that's vaping, but it's the same as of tobacco. Cigarettes have a filter in them, and that filter is made of a non-biodegradable plastic, which is the world's #1 ocean plastic. So we have a fundamental problem here with the product in itself. Even the way tobacco is grown all over the world tobacco is grown in fertile land that should be used for other things that serve humanity. We're also looking at a food security crisis in years to come. That was really brought forward by the terrible war in Ukraine. Why on earth would we allocate our precious farmland to growing tobacco when we know we need to grow more food? It doesn't make any sense. And so you mentioned at the start that all of these issues sort of roll into each other, and tobacco is a very good example of that in terms of, you know, it's food security, it's decent work and respectful work when you've got 17 different countries use child labour to produce tobacco. You've got the issue of healthy water, of nature, of good human health, of sustainable business models. I mean, every one of the SDGs is somehow related to tobacco. So I think it's just one very good example of how all of these issues merge in together. But ultimately, we need a model in society where companies are genuinely sustainable, where transparency is significantly uplifted, and where consumers are empowered to make sustainable choices in everything they do, and where politicians and leaders are courageous and brave to help the big systemic changes that need to occur as quickly as they can.
It's very inspiring.
You know, and in terms of, you know, Australia, you're entering your summer, and we've had these intense heat in lots of different parts of the world. You know, how's the mood? Is it sort of, oh, summer's here at last, or is it a summer anxiety?
Well, it probably depends on how much you've been reading. And unfortunately, if you read everything sustainability related, you're probably not sleeping too well, because you would know that, in fact, Australia is on track for a very, very hot summer. In fact, yesterday it was blisteringly hot in parts of New South Wales and Sydney. And Australia, unfortunately, every summer has some bushfires, but we're expecting a very bad bushfire year again. Every Australian over summer knows they need a bushfire plan. Many Australians go to beautiful little beach towns all around the coast of the whole big, beautiful country that we have. But everyone keeps a close eye on bushfire risk and knowing what's going on in the summer. It's sort of part of the way you grow up in Australia. The problem is that at the end of the day, bushfires are incredibly unpredictable, wild, and they always win. So you need to get out of their way and stay safe, which is sometimes very tricky to do, and you need to plan in advance. So it is very scary for many people in the Australian community over summer. It's only 4 years since we had shocking bushfires in our summer at the end of 2019, at the start of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. You know, we're certainly hoping we're not going to see a repeat of that this year. But at the same time, we know that the world's getting hotter, and that increase in temperature is certain for the foreseeable future. That's baked in, unfortunately. Yeah. So that's what keeps me up at night at the moment.
And you mentioned, you know, you have children. How are they feeling in the face of this? Are they aware of it, or is this sort of, are they affected by it, or are they, you know, people tend to say children are very resilient, or they'll get over anything. How do you see what they're like in that way?
I think yeah, it's a great question. Look, I mean, my boys are pretty young. They're 10 and 12. But the interesting thing is that they do know an awful lot about sustainability. I mean, one of them just in the last few months has been doing a whole sort of term on the energy transition and renewable energy. So how's that for, you know, a 10-year-old to be studying that? I think it's brilliant. And so I remember a couple of years ago, you know, they pose tricky questions to parents that sometimes we don't have a very good answer to. So, for example, it was like, "Mummy, why are you taking your car? Why aren't you walking?"
Ooh, really? Wow.
Yeah. That's a great question. Maybe we should walk. Yes. Do you want to walk? Let's walk to the shops instead. So we walk to the shops. So I think children have always had a great knack at calling their parents to account. And so I think we shouldn't underestimate the impact of children on adults to help adults perhaps nudge adults out of those comfortable behaviours that we've adopted over decades, nudge us out of those behaviours because they've got to go. And even sometimes if you have the best intentions, you do get stuck in your routine. Back to my earlier comment around humans, we love the status quo. That's how we're built. But we have to change. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, my boys will continue to push me and push our family to a more sustainable future as much as we can. One of the tricky issues for Australians is flying. As you would certainly know, we're a million miles from anywhere, which is a wonderful advantage in some ways, but it's also a terrible disadvantage at this exact point in time when, in fact, at the moment, there aren't sustainable aviation fuels. I know that many of them are coming, but there's none here right now. And so if we take the flight anywhere, that is a massive carbon contribution to the world. But Australians and New Zealanders are very isolated, and it does make it very tricky when we're talking about participating in some of these big global conferences where all of the most important conversations are done on the sidelines. If Australians want to go to those conferences, we do have to fly. There's no other way of really participating fully. Obviously, you can watch from your lounge room, sitting there in your pajamas if you want to. But if you're advocating for change, you need to be at these events in person. And that is one of the conflicts and tensions I feel all the time as an Australian.
Right. Yeah, it's a big country. Even within Australia, it's a long way to go. You know, you look at the map and sort of Sydney to Melbourne can't be that far. Actually, it's a fair whack, let alone when you need to get to Perth.
Yeah, well, that's right. Sydney and Melbourne aren't too bad, but when you're flying to Europe, you know, you get on the plane, you have something to eat, you watch a movie, you have a little sleep, and you think, oh, surely we're there. We're getting there, and then the captain will come on and say, oh, we're just flying over the coast of Western Australia. And you think, oh, for goodness sake, you know, we haven't even left the country yet, and we've been on the plane for 5 hours. So it does take a long time to get anywhere. But at the same time, again, if you're in a position of influence, where you do have the chance to really make a change, I think that, you know, there's an obligation that comes with that, and you need to get in there and have those important conversations to nudge things forwards.
Yeah. One
so
area.
How would you advise? Sorry.
No.
Go on,
no. One area that you keep going back to that I think is absolutely paramount. I know David agrees with me. Is the word transparency. Because within the word transparency, if you do have that, then surely it really is the people's choice. But as long as there's not transparency, you can obfuscate, you can tweak, and you can use more or less subtle propaganda to actually try to change the narrative and change the tone of the discussion. How do you go about bringing full transparency to our use of oil, gas, and coal? So people can actually see this would be the cost. This is what the true cost of our use is. And that way, I think everyone in the world would basically call for a carbon market to ensure that this is what it will cost us to actually speed up the transition, to ensure that we take off all the old infrastructure as we create new ones. Because if people saw that cost, I have no doubt that everyone would call for it, barring, you know, a small minority of perhaps die-hard climate change deniers.
I think you're right, though. I think ultimately you need to get to a place where those disclosures are regulated. And the good news is in the financial markets, there's been many mergers of different regulatory systems and structures in the past couple of years. And there now is an internationally accepted sort of disclosure requirement that many countries are looking at adopting in terms of obliging companies to report on a whole list of different metrics that allow people to assess the impacts that these companies are having on the environment. They're more broad than just on the environment. They also include things like human rights and other impacts. But I think ultimately, for companies to continue business, they need to adhere to this heightened transparency that the community expects from them, so that the community can make an assessment of whether those companies should be allowed to continue to have their business. So countries can decide, should those companies be allowed to operate in our country, but ultimately consumers can decide, do we want to do business with that company, or do we want to put our money somewhere else? So I think you're right. I think transparency is very much at the heart of how sustainability will evolve in coming years, because I think, you know, the next generation, the young people today, will just expect companies to be sustainable in their DNA, in the way that they operate. And if companies are not sustainable, then they don't really have a place in modern society. They either need to change, or they will become part of history.
Can I go back, you know, to the point where you mentioned about when you were being a doctor working in the cancer specialty and seeing the damage and what was going on and how it hurts people in that way. And I want to understand a little bit better about how you saw it as affecting people, as actually hurting the individuals and so on. And I have in mind also, because I think, you know, over these weeks we've had experience where we've spoken with a mother who lost a child who drowned in a drain, that they had cleared the drain so that the water would flow faster because they were expecting heavy rain. And there was a 2-year-old who was playing, who ended up being swept away because the water was now flowing faster in that way. And in that way, this is a story of climate change affecting you. And I think actually when you talk about it, the tobacco and how it's affecting people, you know, that those were the stories that really got the research and the work into the cancer and the awareness that became out there, because they were personal stories. They were not, the world isn't going to end tomorrow. You know, there are the class of stories which are in some ways intellectually kind of horrific, but really we put aside.
Yes. Look, I think I really understand what you're saying, and I agree with you. And I think that to advocate for change, the very best advocates are in fact the best storytellers, because in the same way that with tobacco, the science is clear. That's not the difficult part. The difficult part is communicating it to people who need to hear the message and change. It's actually the same with any form of change. It's not just tobacco, it's not just climate change and moving people to sustainability. Whatever you're trying to do, or whatever it is that you're trying to change, it's not the science or the maths or the technical stuff that will make the recipient open to your message. It's a human story that will do that. And that is the masterful element of a really great communicator. It is finding a story that grabs somebody's heart. You don't need to grab their brain. Their brain will be fixed later on when you can pummel them with all the facts and the statistics. You'll get their brain later. You've got to get their heart. You've got to make them like you and trust you, or like and trust this person who's in the story. That's what you have to do to sort of capture them, capture their attention and open their mind to change. And so stories are the most powerful things. And we as advocates, part of the, you know, the global community of people trying to create change and trying to advocate for a better world, I'm acutely aware of the power of stories, and I'm always looking for a great story to tell. It's not necessarily that it has to be my story or the story of someone I know, but it's a story that people can identify with, or a story that shocks people, or a story where somebody can really see themselves in those shoes, or a story that just completely changes the way you think about something, or a story that makes somebody laugh or have a little smile or create some emotion in someone. But the world has a lot more room for those stories, and we need to find people to tell them or tell their stories for them, and really leverage the great power of stories for good.
Wow. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a difficulty, certainly, that I'm experiencing a lot of, because I'm a geek, right? So I always tend to think that the persuasion of the actual factual argument should win the day. And that's clearly not the case.
You know what though? I'm a geek too. I mean, I was the biggest maths nerd at school, and I secretly am still a maths nerd at heart. I love numbers. I love counting. I just love maths. I love statistics and so forth. I love all of those things. So I really get it. And in fact, a lot of doctors are geeks as well. And, there's nothing wrong with nerds. I should probably set up a support group globally for nerds. Because, we're quite nice when you get to know us. But this is the thing. The technical genius may not be the right person to communicate the message. And I think that's probably where we do need, we need people who are brilliant at marketing. They're brilliant at how to craft a message. They're brilliant at working out how to capture somebody's heart. That's their craft. And I often think that technical geniuses need to become better friends with marketing experts and communication experts, because there is a bit of a gap there. And I've seen that gap not just in the issue that I've been dealing with, in the last 10 or 13 years in my life, but in many issues. The technical person is not necessarily the right person to be giving the message. And that's all right. We've all got our different roles and parts to play, but it can be a challenge with scientists. And, and I know that firsthand, because I had to really learn to speak in a completely different way. The way I would speak to doctors or scientists is completely different to when I'm speaking, for example, to the media or to lay people or to, a group of community leaders. So I always try to make sure the language that I use is very specific for the people who are receiving the message. And I'm not sure I always get it right still. I mean, it's a craft, it's an art form. It is not a science.
Yeah, no, I can imagine that first talk on that Friday you gave to the audience of the medics when they were expecting some oncology case, and the difference between the language that you might have used then to now when you may do the same thing. I can somehow I imagine that there was a transformation somewhere along the way.
Absolutely. And that's right. And the other thing, David, is that when I used to give presentations right at the start, I used to use some slides, and I'd put a number or a picture on a slide, and then I would tell a little story about the slide or give the message for that slide. And I was very, very sensitive to how those messages were received. And if the message sort of fell flat and no one really liked what was going on, I would just think, gosh, I've messed that up. I haven't got that right. And I would say to people, when I said this, what did that make you think? And either they'd miss the message or it just hadn't gone right because I hadn't crafted it accurately enough or specifically enough for that particular group. And so I would always ask for feedback. I would not hesitate to ditch a slide if it wasn't working, and I'd replace it with something else. And so I constantly curated my presentation by getting rid of the bad stuff or changing the stuff that wasn't working, and keeping the slides that always worked and telling the stories that always got a reaction. And I worked out that I think I have refined that talk over 500 times by constantly working on it and really leaning into feedback and being very sensitive to the way that it was received. And as I said, I keep changing it now. It's not that I've got it perfect. I don't know if it will ever be perfect, because it will always probably suit a very specific time in history, a very specific sentiment. Some countries, I would be able to say things very openly and very almost bluntly. Like, when you're in New Zealand or the Netherlands, you can just say what you need to say and you don't have to worry about packaging it. But in some other countries, you have to be very, very, very gentle about the way you speak. And It has to be very reserved and accommodating and almost gentle in the way that you deliver a message. So there are cultural differences, there are different organizations, there are different people, there's different age groups, different backgrounds. So the way that you shape a message can be endlessly, I think, refined. And, it's an incredible sort of craft. It's an incredible gift that some people have, but I think everybody needs to be open to learning it a bit better, especially those who are trying to create change.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful and instructive kind of advice.
It is very much.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking of all the different situations when we've tried to speak to people, and certainly, I think at the beginning we were very much, trying to drive a train through, as opposed to getting off a station, helping people with the luggage before talking to them.
But this is it, though. You've got to try different things, right? And then you see what works and what doesn't work, and then you find, that's it. You'll find your pathway. And do remember, though, if you're not successful one day, don't get too upset, because I have delivered the same message to thousands of people. And sometimes if it doesn't go down well, I keep thinking, well, just remember that yesterday I did almost exactly the same presentation and it went perfectly. So, it's not always you. Sometimes you have to have an open ear at the other end. So it's, it's a bit of the magic of humanity, that we're all slightly different in the way that we receive our communications. And it's always going to be something to keep us on our toes.
And are you still involved in the oncology? Are you still kind of, how do you split the time out between that with you?
Well, so oncology is basically phased out of my life now, and it's replaced with other things. So I'm very busy with tobacco-free portfolios. I'm on a few different boards of organisations, and my new passion in the last sort of 18 months has been to work with a big group of incredible experts who are advocating for clean indoor air quality measures to be brought in all throughout the world. And part of that is to respond to the COVID crisis. So there are many diseases that are spread in the air. And so given that we spend so much time indoors, we need to make sure that air is clean, not just from COVID, but from influenza or whatever the next pandemic will be, but also in response to climate change and increasing bushfires, we need to make sure our air is clean and has no bushfire smoke in it. We need to be aware of an increase in vehicle emissions all around the world, and those emissions come inside and do pollute our environments. And where I am in Melbourne, we have a big problem with pollen. And many people have sensitivities to pollen and spend half of their spring sneezing and sniffing, which is obviously not great for your health either. So I'm working with aerosol scientists and architects and builders and engineers to advocate for improved health in our buildings. So it's very interesting, and I have no time left at all.
Yes, no, I can understand. I can definitely imagine that. So, but thank you very much. I mean, you mentioned Azerbaijan next year. I'm not sure if that's decided yet. Has that been firmed?
Yes, it is. Yeah, it was decided yesterday. So Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, is going to be hosting COP29 next year. So put a big star in your diary, and yes, I look forward to seeing you there. And thank you so much for having me on today. And I look forward to hearing from any of your audience today. I'm very easy to find. I'm on Twitter, or X as it's now called. My hashtag is Dr Bron King. And I'm very happy to connect with anyone out there who's got some great ideas for how to get us to a more sustainable world as fast as we can.
Great. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. It's a huge honor and pleasure having you with us.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And have a good evening.
Indeed. There she was, a tremendous force for good in the tobacco space, but she clearly has very strong views on the overall area of sustainability as well. I really enjoyed speaking to her. I think she makes many excellent points, and I'm very hopeful that her relatively optimistic view of the world actually comes into fruition. So with that, we're going to conclude today's activities, the 11th day of COP, before the grand finale tomorrow, as we close on the 12th day, as you might imagine. That was all for us today. We shall return with an overnight episode, 7 o'clock Los Angeles time. But otherwise, we'll be back 7 o'clock Tokyo, 7 o'clock Karachi, and 7 o'clock London time tomorrow. That was all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Good night to you all.
There you go, unmuted myself. Good night to you all. So it's for you, the antidote to COP28. Redirect your money, redirect your spending to those you think are making the world better. Good night.
Good night.